Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video. This is going to be my review for The Mandalorian Season 2, Episode 2, overall Chapter 10, The Passenger. And I think it's pretty fair to say, look, this is definitely one of, if not the weakest episodes of The Mandalorian. But this show is still high quality, and so it was still enjoyable, even if I really don't think was the style or type of episode that we necessarily needed. It had some nice ideas, it was well sort of like filmed, had some nice drama and action to it, but the problem that we're quickly getting into is that we only have 8 episodes this season, and we're 2 episodes down, and let's be honest here, 2 episodes in, not a lot has happened. In terms of main takeaways from these opening 2 episodes, we have, okay, confirmed, Boba Fett is alive, and the Mandalorian now has his armor. That is something that I suppose will be activated, who knows when, but it's a tease. That's basically the plot takeaway from the first episode, more or less. And then the general plot thread across the first 2 episodes has been, as part of the quest for the Mandalorian to get the child back to its people, the Mandalorian is trying to find other Mandalorians to get advice about where to go. So, what we're trying to accomplish right now with the plot is still just a very basic opening stage of a story. And I think, the more time goes on without us actually getting some more sort of meat with the plot, the more we're kind of going like, when are we going to get it? Like, we haven't seen, like, Moff Gideon this season yet. Or any of the, like, most of the other, like, supporting characters that we had last season. We haven't learned anything about Baby Yoda. And a lot of the sort of teased big characters outside of the Boba Fett tease haven't really come into play yet. So, either we're going to get done with the next episode, and then the remaining 5 episodes from the season are just going to really, really kick things off. Or this season is going to have roughly the same structure as the first season, which is that we're going to have more one-off, one-shot episodes until we kind of get to the big sort of plot reveals towards the end. And I think that was the problem with this episode. One, it was like 15 minutes shorter than the first episode of the season, which immediately sort of like, oh, it's going to be one of these episodes, because we basically, they did something quite similar in the first season. There was like an episode that was like under 40 minutes. This wasn't quite that, but it was along those lines. And again, it's this quest that you have to do to get to the place where hopefully the Frog Woman's husband will have the correct information the Mandalorian needs to meet other Mandalorians and find out where to go next. And I think that's the major problem of, like, if they don't reveal that in the next episode, or something doesn't happen to get the plot going next week in the continuation of this episode, like, I think you're really going to be pushing people's patience here with the plot. I'm of course still willing to give the show that chance, because I think this show has a ton of potential, and when it gets going, it is going to be amazing. This, like I said, just was relatively weak as an episode, because what did we really accomplish here? Okay, we got another typical Mandalorian kind of fight scene right at the start, people still out to get the child and so on. He manages to get out of that. Nice move with the jetpack, just taking it off, remote activating it and killing the kind of small guy. And, they go back to, I think her name's Pelly, back at the, the spaceport. And the idea is that, okay, she has met this, frog alien who wants to return to the planet where her husband is, because basically her family line is at risk. This is the last sort of batch of eggs she'll ever produce, and so if she doesn't have more children here, the family line is going to end. So sort of a personal quest for this new alien character, and this is what the Mandalorian is being tasked with. Bring her there, basically to serve as a taxi for the sake of this mission. And her husband has information about where potential Mandalorians are. Okay, that's fine. And the main problem is just that, like, as the episode then progressed, it was just like, okay, the running joke that we're doing across the whole episode is that Baby Yoda, the child, constantly wants to try and eat these eggs. And I think the joke was fine the first couple of times. And it was like, okay, that's okay. But I think tonally, across the overall episode, the amount of times they did it, it was very confused, because this is this very serious thing for this new character, that, you know, her last hope to continue her family. And you're making a joke out of, like, okay, everyone loves Baby Yoda, but Baby Yoda also likes to eat stuff and puts, like, anything in his mouth. And you literally show, like, in multiple scenes, like, how many eggs did he eat? Like 3, 4 across the episode? And there's not that many of them left. And they made it a joke sort of like every single time. And as much as The Mandalorian was kind of like, you know, please stop, don't do that, no, not food, they still played up the scenes of Baby Yoda constantly going to eat it as, like, look how curious Baby Yoda is. So I just thought they maybe hit that one a little bit too hard over the course of the episode. There was probably too many scenes with that. Because it was, I think, funny the first time, but it also was like, are we meant to just treat this frog character as being a joke, that her eggs don't matter, or are we meant to care? That's what was confusing, because, you know, they were constantly going back to, like, we have to make sure the eggs are intact, get them out of this pool, have the eggs survive the crash, and they constantly go back to Baby Yoda being interested in them. Probably the most interesting part of the episode was the fact that we got the two of the pilots that we saw in one of the previous episodes, The Prisoner, I think it was episode 6 from last season, and they sort of came back to that a little bit, of like, I like the sort of, you know, he got sort of pulled over in space and was having that sort of a standard conversation with them, as if they were, like, just police officers, and they're like, you know, your tail light is out, I'll get that fixed, and they're about to go on, but then they ask him to do this, and he has to run. And so we get our chase sequence of the Mandalorian running away from the New Republic here. And I like the way they returned at the end of the episode, and they sort of saved the Mandalorian for the last few spiders. But also that when they finally talked, they were just, these characters are not enemies, even though the Mandalorian sort of knows he's not really meant to, like, you know, be in contact with them, really, because they're kind of after him. It's where it really highlights that, as much as the Mandalorian is sort of the hero of this story, he, in the grand scheme of Star Wars, is a kind of grey character, because he is a bounty hunter, a known bounty hunter, and has done bad things in the past. He is not on the New Republic side of things. He's not on the sort of, you know, First Order side of things either, but he's in the middle. So to these X-Wing pilots, he is a criminal, like, as a bounty hunter, and they sort of treat him that way. But because they are good characters, they note that we checked the security footage, and while, yes, you should be arrested for what you did there, sort of breaking in there, we also acknowledge that we saw on the footage that you apprehended some of those criminals for us, and you attempted to protect the New Republic officer that was at the station. And so, because of that, we are going to, you know, let you go. We're not going to help you repair your ship, but we're also not going to arrest you for kind of what's happened here. I just thought that was a kind of very nice and reasonable way to do it. Not to mention the fact that one of the pilots was, of course, Dave Filoni's character from the previous season. So that was nice to see. Other than that, like, obviously at the start of the episode, the chase scene, he crashes onto this kind of icy planet, and the ship is damaged, and it's just, you know, obviously dealing with the eggs quite a lot, and then the spiders come into play. Obviously, it created a bit of a horror dynamic. Obviously, spiders are always kind of creepy, especially when there's that many of them, and even though the Mandalorian is very powerful, has all these tools at his disposal, there's nothing he can do to just stop, like, what seemed like an entire cave just full of, in some cases, giant spiders from coming after him. And The fact that they were kind of Baby Yoda ate one of them and then they were crawling all over him. It's like it was a kind of pretty terrifying situation, especially because a lot of people are creeped out by spiders, and it's always a bit disconcerting when you see that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, they also didn't really go into any particular depth here with it. It was just a threat on an episode that overall served as completely a side distraction, in that this only happened because the Mandalorian had to try and escape from the New Republic, when really the mission should have just been a straight transportation. And I assume and I hope that literally the next episode is arriving at the planet where her husband is, and we can get straight down to tell me the information about the Mandalorian, the Mandalorians that you know about. That kind of, to me, has to be the way they start off next week. If we have another mission of transporting her, that could be enough for, I think, some people to drop the series, just because as much as I loved the first episode of the season, it wasn't particularly plot focused, and then this one was a much more extreme example of it not being plot focused, and then it also not having that incredible world building element, or it just feeling like a full on movie, like the kind of long-ish opening episode of this season was. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting factors going on here. I think once we hit an episode where something really, really big and notable happens, everyone will come flocking back to the series. But I think it's going to take that actually happening. And that's why there's a kind of weirdness around why are they so slow with the plot? We have to be real here in that the first season didn't have that much plot to it. But we let the first season away with it because it was the introduction season. You had to have an individual episode to introduce us to Cara Dune, to introduce us to Queel, and so on. But this season, we haven't kind of had that just yet, and so is the plot going to kick back into gear sooner rather than later? And then how are the other characters going to come into play? Because realistically, the way the plot is going to have to kind of pan out is that he gets the information, and either the Mandalorian that he has to find is Bo-Katan or Sabine, and through those two, he has a direct connection to meeting, Ahsoka, Force user Jedi, who would know about the child species. That's the connection of the dots in terms of meeting someone who actually knows what the child species is, having encountered another member of that species. Otherwise, it's kind of wait, how would the other Mandalorians, the one from just the other clans, how would they know necessarily what he has to do to get to this place? And I think it's just you at this point, 2 episodes in, you're asking yourself are we going to learn anything about the Baby Yoda or the Yoda species in this season or not? Or is this just the pacing of this show, that each season is really only going to hit a couple of big notes across the 8 episodes, and for the most part is going to be more standalone episodes? That's where it's not quite clear, in that until the plot properly kicks into gear, and we have, I suppose, a more expanded main cast who are in every single episode, it's hard to fully picture the exact progress of the series, because, as I've said before, the Mandalorian himself has some interesting stuff to him with his past, but it doesn't really look like there's much of an opportunity to get into that, because he keeps a helmet on at all times and doesn't take it off in front of anyone. And so the characters who do know him aren't going to be overly bringing up his past all that much, and because he can't, I suppose, communicate properly with Baby Yoda, you're not really getting much kind of either way with that dynamic, outside of the fact that, Baby Yoda is dependent on the Mandalorian, and the Mandalorian, this is his quest. As part of the Mandalorian culture, his quest now is to do this. This is the whole sort of significance in a way about the sort of sigil thing that he got last season, is that it's related to this quest, and that's why he wants to accomplish it so badly. But we have to, and that's where I think the sooner they introduce like Cara Dune again and potentially just have her team up for going forward with the Mandalorian, I think the better, because just from him interacting with more characters who he's familiar with, we'll get more of his personality, and that will all come out. Because in the end, that was probably the biggest thing in this episode, is that because he couldn't really communicate with the frog person, and then because Baby Yoda also, there's no real communication there, his only real back and forth was with the New Republic pilots at the end. And even then, that was just a standoff, and they're just minor characters. So, they're sort of the problems. And that, like I said, I enjoyed watching this episode. I think, I don't really see the case for this was just a objectively bad episode. It wasn't what we wanted, it wasn't what we needed, but it was still enjoyable and fun. And there's always, some credit to saying that, but, obviously as a reviewer, you have to look at more than that, in that there is only so long we can give the show the excuse of, oh, it's still early in the season. They're just setting things up. We let them do that in the first episode because they delivered what that episode was about so well that I think a lot of people let it away with it. This one isn't going to get that unless the payoff when we finally deliver her to her husband is big enough to justify why we, I suppose, had a full episode and then however much of the next episode they devote to this to set it up. But yeah, they're my thoughts on the episode. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.